In the beginning, before there was anything, no time, no space, no light, or darkness, there was only God. In his infinite wisdom and love, he decided to create a world, a place filled with life and beauty, where his presence could be known and shared. In the stillness of the void, God spoke, "Let there be light." And with that command, light burst forth, filling the emptiness with a radiant glow. The light was pure and warm, driving away the darkness that had covered everything. God saw the light and knew that it was good. He separated the light from the darkness, calling the light day, and the darkness night. Thus, the first day came to a close, and time began. On the second day, God focused on the waters that covered the earth. "Let there be a vault between the waters to separate water from water," he said. Immediately, a vast expanse appeared, creating the sky above and the waters below. The sky arched high and wide, a blue dome over the earth, beautiful and boundless. God looked upon the sky and saw that it was good. And so, the second day ended, with the sky and sea set in place. As the third day dawned, God turned his attention to the waters below the sky. "Let the waters under the sky be gathered to one place, and let dry ground appear," he commanded. The waters obeyed, drawing back to reveal the land beneath, mountains, valleys, and plains. God called the dry ground earth, and the gathered waters seas. But the earth was still bare, so God spoke again, "Let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants and trees that bear fruit." At his word, the earth flourished. Grass sprouted, trees rose tall, and flowers bloomed in every color. The land was now vibrant and alive, covered in green and adorned with fruit. God saw the beauty of the earth and declared it good. The third day ended, and the world was no longer barren. On the fourth day, God turned his eyes to the sky. "Let there be lights in the vault of the sky to separate the day from the night," he said. "Let them serve as signs to mark sacred times, days, and years." In an instant, the sun appeared, shining brightly to rule the day. The moon followed, casting a gentle glow to govern the night. And all around, stars filled the sky, twinkling like diamonds. These lights would guide the earth, marking the passage of time and the rhythms of life. God saw that the sun, moon, and stars were good, and so the fourth day came to an end. The fifth day arrived, and God turned his thoughts to the waters and the sky. "Let the water teem with living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the sky," he commanded. The oceans swirled with life as fish, whales, and all manner of sea creatures filled the depths. Above, birds of every kind took flight, their songs filling the air. God blessed these creatures, saying, "Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the seas and let the birds multiply on the earth." God saw that it was good, and thus the fifth day ended, with the seas and skies alive with movement. On the sixth day, God turned to the land. "Let the earth bring forth living creatures, livestock, creatures that move along the ground, and wild animals," he said. The earth responded, and soon the land was filled with animals of all kinds, mighty lions, gentle deer, and every creature imaginable. God saw that it was good. But there was still something missing. With great care, God spoke again, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, and all the animals of the earth." From the dust of the ground, God formed the first man, shaping him with his own hands. Then, God breathed into the man's nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. God named him Adam, and he placed Adam in the Garden of Eden, a paradise filled with every kind of plant and creature. But as Adam tended the garden and named the animals, God saw that Adam was alone. "It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him," God said. So, God caused Adam to fall into a deep sleep. While Adam slept, God took one of his ribs and closed up the place with flesh. From the rib, God fashioned a woman, perfectly suited to be Adam's companion. He brought her to Adam, and when Adam awoke, he was filled with joy. "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh," Adam said. "She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man." God blessed them both, telling them to be fruitful and multiply, to fill the earth and subdue it. He gave them dominion over all living things and provided everything they would need. God looked at everything he had made, including the man and woman, and saw that it was very good. And so, the sixth day ended. On the seventh day, with the work of creation complete, God rested from all his labor. He blessed the seventh day and made it holy, for on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. The heavens and the earth were now finished, a world filled with life, beauty, and harmony. In this world, mankind, created in God's image, would live, love, and walk with God. The story of the world had begun, with God's presence woven into every part of it. Adam and Eve lived in the Garden of Eden, a place of unmatched beauty and peace. The garden was filled with every kind of tree, plant, and flower. Rivers flowed gently, and animals roamed freely, unafraid of each other or of Adam and Eve. The air was sweet, and the skies were always bright. It was a paradise, and everything they needed was provided by God. In the midst of the garden, God placed two special trees. One was the tree of life, and the other was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. God spoke to Adam and Eve, saying, "You are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat from it, you will certainly die." God's words were clear, and Adam and Eve understood. They had been given everything, including the freedom to choose. Their life in the garden was a life of harmony, not just with the world around them but with God himself, who walked with them in the cool of the day. One day, as Eve walked near the center of the garden, she was approached by a serpent. This serpent was more cunning than any of the other creatures. It spoke to Eve, saying, "Did God really say, 'You must not eat from any tree in the garden'?" Eve replied, "We may eat fruit from the trees in the garden, but God did say, 'You must not eat fruit from the tree that is in the middle of the garden, and you must not touch it, or you will die.'" The serpent, with a sly smile, said, "You will not certainly die. For God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." Eve looked at the fruit on the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It was beautiful and looked delicious. She desired the wisdom it might give her. So, she took some of the fruit and ate it. Then, she gave some to Adam, who was with her, and he ate it too. The moment they ate the fruit, their eyes were opened, and they realized they were naked. Shame and fear crept into their hearts for the first time. They quickly sewed fig leaves together to cover themselves and hid among the trees when they heard God walking in the garden. God called out to Adam, "Where are you?" Adam replied, "I heard you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid." "Who told you that you were naked?" God asked. "Have you eaten from the tree that I commanded you not to eat from?" Adam said, "The woman you put here with me, she gave me some fruit from the tree, and I ate it." Then God said to Eve, "What is this you have done?" Eve answered, "The serpent deceived me, and I ate." God's heart was grieved by their disobedience, but his justice required that there be consequences for their actions. He spoke first to the serpent, cursing it to crawl on its belly and declaring enmity between it and the woman, and between its offspring and hers. He then turned to Eve, telling her that her pain in childbirth would greatly increase and that her relationship with Adam would become one of struggle. To Adam, God said, "Because you listened to your wife and ate fruit from the tree about which I commanded you, you must not eat from it. Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil, you will eat food from it all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow, you will eat your food until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you will return." God's words echoed in the garden, and the perfect harmony that once existed was broken. Despite their disobedience, God's love for Adam and Eve remained. He made garments of skin for them to wear, covering their shame. But they could no longer stay in the garden. To protect them from eating from the tree of life and living forever in their fallen state, God banished them from Eden. He placed cherubim and a flaming sword flashing back and forth to guard the way to the tree of life. Adam and Eve, now clothed and carrying the knowledge of good and evil, were sent out into the world. They were to work the ground from which Adam had been made, and their lives, once so simple and joyful, became marked by toil and pain. Though they were no longer in Eden, Adam and Eve carried with them the memory of the garden and the knowledge that they had been created in God's image. They began their lives anew, outside the garden, learning to live and work in a world that was now much harsher than before. But even as they faced the challenges of this new life, they held on to the hope that God's promise of redemption would one day be fulfilled. For in his words to the serpent, God had hinted at a future victory, one who would crush the serpent's head and restore what had been lost. Adam and Eve would go on to have children, and their descendants would fill the earth, carrying with them the story of creation, the fall, and the hope for a future restoration. And so, the story of the world continued, with God watching over his creation, guiding and loving humanity even in their brokenness, and preparing the way for a new covenant that would one day restore the relationship between God and mankind. After being expelled from the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve found themselves in a world far different from the paradise they had known. The land was harsh and unforgiving, and they had to learn to cultivate it with hard work and determination. Every day brought new challenges, but they faced them together, holding on to the memories of Eden and the hope that God had not abandoned them. In time, Eve gave birth to their first son, whom they named Cain. Eve rejoiced, saying, "With the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man." Not long after, she gave birth to a second son, Abel. The two boys grew up with their parents' teachings, learning to work the land and tend the animals. Cain became a farmer, working the soil to produce crops, while Abel became a shepherd, caring for the flocks. The brothers lived side by side, but as they grew, so did the differences between them. One day, Cain and Abel brought offerings to the Lord. Cain offered some of the fruits of the soil, while Abel brought fat portions from the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but he did not look with favor on Cain's offering. This filled Cain with anger and jealousy. The Lord, seeing Cain's troubled heart, spoke to him, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door, it desires to have you, but you must rule over it." Despite God's warning, Cain's jealousy festered. He lured Abel into the field, and there, in a fit of rage, he struck his brother down, killing him. Abel's blood soaked into the ground, crying out to God from the earth. God, who sees all, came to Cain and asked, "Where is your brother Abel?" Cain, trying to hide his guilt, replied, "I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper?" But God said, "What have you done? Listen. Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth." Cain, realizing the severity of his punishment, cried out, "My punishment is more than I can bear. Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." But God, in his mercy, placed a mark on Cain so that no one who found him would kill him. Cain then went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. There, he began a new life, far from his family, and built a city named after his son, Enoch. Adam and Eve, grieving the loss of Abel and the exile of Cain, continued to live and work the land. In time, Eve gave birth to another son, whom they named Seth. Eve said, "God has granted me another child in place of Abel, since Cain killed him." Through Seth, Adam and Eve's lineage continued, and their descendants began to spread across the earth. The people multiplied, forming communities, and each generation passed down the stories of creation, the fall, and the hope for redemption. As humanity grew, so did its distance from God. The descendants of Cain and other early humans began to pursue their own desires, turning away from God's ways. Wickedness spread across the earth, and violence became common. God looked down on the world he had created and saw that the wickedness of humanity was great, and that every inclination of the human heart was only evil all the time. God's heart was deeply troubled, and he regretted that he had made human beings on the earth. But amid this corruption, one man found favor in God's eyes, a man named Noah. God spoke to Noah, instructing him to build an ark, for he had decided to cleanse the earth with a great flood. Noah, a righteous man who walked with God, obeyed his command. He built the ark as God had directed, gathering his family and pairs of every living creature to preserve life through the coming deluge. For 40 days and 40 nights, the rain fell, and the waters covered the earth, wiping out all living things. But God remembered Noah and all who were with him in the ark. When the waters receded, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. Noah and his family emerged from the ark, and the first thing Noah did was build an altar to the Lord. God was pleased with Noah's faithfulness and made a covenant with him, promising never again to destroy all life with a flood. He placed a rainbow in the sky as a sign of this covenant, a reminder of his mercy and love. Noah's descendants began to repopulate the earth, and from them came many nations. But even as the people spread, the memory of God's covenant and the knowledge of his ways began to fade again. They sought to make a name for themselves, leading to the construction of the Tower of Babel, a symbol of human pride and ambition. Seeing this, God confused their language, causing them to no longer understand one another. They abandoned the tower, and the people were scattered across the face of the earth, forming different nations and cultures. Despite humanity's repeated failings, God's plan for redemption was never abandoned. Through Noah's lineage, God chose a man named Abraham, with whom he made a special covenant. God promised Abraham that his descendants would become a great nation, and through them, all the nations of the earth would be blessed. This covenant set the stage for the unfolding of God's plan to restore the relationship between himself and humanity, a plan that would culminate in the coming of a Savior, who would offer a way back to the paradise that was lost. Generations passed, and from the descendants of Noah came a man named Abram, who lived in the city of Ur. One day, God spoke to Abram, calling him to leave his country, his people, and his father's household, and go to a land that God would show him. God promised Abram, "I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you, I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." Trusting in God's promise, Abram obeyed and left his homeland, taking with him his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, and all their possessions. They traveled to the land of Canaan, where God appeared to Abram again and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." Abram built an altar there to the Lord, marking the place where God's covenant with him began. As Abram and Sarai lived in Canaan, God's promises to them seemed to be delayed. Sarai was barren and could not have children, and the land God promised was inhabited by other nations. But God assured Abram, saying, "Look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. So shall your offspring be." Abram believed the Lord, and his faith was credited to him as righteousness. God made a covenant with Abram, changing his name to Abraham, meaning, father of many nations, and Sarai's name to Sarah, meaning, princess. God promised that Sarah would bear a son, even in her old age, and through this son, Abraham's descendants would become a great nation. To seal this covenant, God instructed Abraham to circumcise every male in his household as a sign of the everlasting covenant between them. As God had promised, Sarah bore a son, and they named him Isaac, meaning, he laughs, because both Abraham and Sarah had laughed at the idea of having a child in their old age. Isaac was the child of promise, and through him, God's covenant with Abraham would continue. Isaac grew up in the land of Canaan, and when he was a young man, God tested Abraham's faith in an extraordinary way. God told Abraham to take Isaac to the region of Moriah and sacrifice him as a burnt offering. Though it pained him deeply, Abraham obeyed, trusting that God could raise Isaac from the dead if necessary. As they reached the place, Abraham built an altar, bound Isaac, and laid him on it. Just as he was about to sacrifice his son, an angel of the Lord called out, "Do not lay a hand on the boy. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." God provided a ram caught in a thicket as a substitute for Isaac, and Abraham sacrificed it in his place. God reaffirmed his covenant with Abraham, promising that through Isaac, Abraham's descendants would be as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore, and through them, all nations on earth would be blessed. Isaac married Rebekah, and they had 2 sons, Esau and Jacob. Though Esau was the firstborn, Jacob, with the help of his mother, received the blessing meant for Esau by deceiving Isaac. Jacob, later known as Israel, became the father of the 12 tribes of Israel. Jacob's life was marked by struggles and encounters with God. He fled from Esau's wrath to his uncle Laban's house, where he married Leah and Rachel, and fathered 12 sons. God appeared to Jacob in a dream, reaffirming the covenant made with Abraham and Isaac, and Jacob's name was changed to Israel, meaning, he struggles with God. Jacob's 12 sons became the leaders of the 12 tribes of Israel. Among them was Joseph, Jacob's favorite son, who was sold into slavery by his jealous brothers. Despite this, God was with Joseph, and he rose to power in Egypt, eventually saving his family from a severe famine. Joseph's family, the Israelites, settled in Egypt and prospered. However, as time passed, a new Pharaoh came to power who did not know Joseph. Fearing the growing number of Israelites, Pharaoh enslaved them and subjected them to harsh labor. Yet, despite the oppression, the Israelites continued to multiply, fulfilling God's promise to Abraham. Pharaoh, worried that the Israelites might rise up against him, ordered that every Hebrew baby boy be thrown into the Nile River. But one baby boy was hidden by his mother, placed in a basket, and set afloat on the river. This child, Moses, was found and adopted by Pharaoh's daughter, and he grew up in the Egyptian palace. When Moses grew up, he learned of his true heritage and was moved by the suffering of his people. One day, he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave and killed the Egyptian in anger. Fearing for his life, Moses fled to the land of Midian, where he started a new life as a shepherd. But God had a plan for Moses. One day, while tending his sheep, Moses saw a burning bush that was not consumed by the flames. God spoke to Moses from the bush, calling him to return to Egypt and lead the Israelites out of slavery. Moses, with his brother Aaron, confronted Pharaoh, demanding in God's name, "Let my people go." Pharaoh refused, and God sent 10 plagues upon Egypt, each more devastating than the last. Finally, after the death of every firstborn in Egypt, Pharaoh relented and allowed the Israelites to leave. The Israelites left Egypt in haste, and God led them through the wilderness by a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. When Pharaoh changed his mind and pursued them, God parted the Red Sea, allowing the Israelites to pass through on dry ground and drowning the pursuing Egyptian army. After their miraculous escape, the Israelites journeyed to Mount Sinai, where God made a covenant with them through Moses. God gave them the 10 Commandments, laws that would guide their relationship with Him and with each other. These laws were written on stone tablets and became the foundation of the covenant between God and His chosen people. God promised to be with the Israelites, to guide them, and to bring them into the promised land, a land flowing with milk and honey. In return, the Israelites were to be faithful to God, worshiping Him alone and following His commandments. The Israelites wandered in the wilderness for 40 years due to their disobedience and lack of faith. Despite their failings, God provided for them, giving them manna from heaven and water from a rock. He guided them through the desert, protecting them from their enemies and teaching them to rely on Him. As the time came for the Israelites to enter the promised land, Moses passed leadership to Joshua, one of his faithful followers. Moses climbed Mount Nebo, where God showed him the land promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but he was not allowed to enter it himself. Moses died on the mountain, and God buried him in an unknown grave. Under Joshua's leadership, the Israelites crossed the Jordan River and entered the Promised Land. They conquered the cities of Canaan, starting with Jericho, whose walls fell after the Israelites marched around them for 7 days, as God had commanded. The land was divided among the 12 tribes of Israel, fulfilling the promise God made to their ancestors. The Israelites settled in the land, and for a time, they served the Lord and lived in peace. However, as generations passed, the Israelites began to forget the Lord and turn to the worship of other gods. This led to a cycle of sin, oppression, repentance, and deliverance. God raised up judges, leaders like Deborah, Gideon, and Samson, to deliver the Israelites from their enemies and lead them back to Him. But the cycle of disobedience continued, and the people cried out for a king to lead them, like the nations around them. Though God was their true king, He granted their request and appointed Saul as the first king of Israel. Saul's reign was marked by both successes and failures, but his disobedience to God led to his downfall. God chose David, a shepherd boy from Bethlehem, to be the next king. David was a man after God's own heart, and under his rule, Israel became a strong, united nation. David's son, Solomon, succeeded him and built the temple in Jerusalem, a permanent dwelling place for the Ark of the Covenant. Solomon's wisdom and wealth were renowned, and Israel reached the height of its glory. But after Solomon's death, the kingdom was divided into two, Israel in the north and Judah in the south. The people continued to turn away from God, and despite the warnings of the prophets, who called them to repentance, both kingdoms eventually fell, Israel to the Assyrians and Judah to the Babylonians. Saul's reign was marked by both successes and failures, but his disobedience to God led to his downfall. God chose David, a shepherd boy from Bethlehem, to be the next king. David was a man after God's own heart, and under his rule, Israel became a strong, united nation. David's son, Solomon, succeeded him and built the temple in Jerusalem, a permanent dwelling place for the Ark of the Covenant. Solomon's wisdom and wealth were renowned, and Israel reached the height of its glory. But after Solomon's death, the kingdom was divided into two, Israel in the north and Judah in the south. The people continued to turn away from God, and despite the warnings of the prophets, who called them to repentance, both kingdoms eventually fell, Israel to the Assyrians and Judah to the Babylonians. The people of Judah were taken into exile in Babylon, where they mourned the loss of their homeland and the destruction of the temple. But even in exile, God did not abandon His people. Through the prophets, He promised that they would one day return to their land and that a new covenant would be established, one written on their hearts. After 70 years of exile in Babylon, God stirred the heart of Cyrus, the king of Persia, to issue a decree allowing the Jews to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. The first group of exiles, led by Zerubbabel, returned to their homeland. They began the long and arduous task of rebuilding the temple, despite opposition from neighboring peoples. The foundation of the new temple was laid, and though it was not as magnificent as Solomon's temple, the people rejoiced, knowing that God's presence would once again dwell among them. However, the work on the temple stalled due to opposition and discouragement, until the prophets Haggai and Zechariah urged the people to complete it. Finally, the temple was finished, and the people celebrated the Passover, marking a new beginning in their relationship with God. Years later, another group of exiles returned under the leadership of Ezra, a scribe skilled in the law of Moses. Ezra's mission was to restore the spiritual life of the people. He taught them God's laws and led them in a renewal of the covenant, urging them to separate themselves from the sinful practices they had adopted during the exile. Shortly after, Nehemiah, who served as a cupbearer to the Persian king, received permission to return to Jerusalem to rebuild its walls. The walls of Jerusalem lay in ruins, leaving the city vulnerable to attack. Nehemiah, with determination and faith, rallied the people to rebuild the walls despite fierce opposition from their enemies. Within 52 days, the walls were completed, and the city was once again fortified. Nehemiah and Ezra gathered all the people and read aloud the law of Moses. The people wept as they realized how far they had strayed from God's commands. But Ezra and Nehemiah encouraged them, saying, "The joy of the Lord is your strength." The people repented and renewed their commitment to follow God's laws, and a great celebration followed, marking the dedication of the walls and the revival of the nation. Despite the rebuilding efforts, Israel remained under foreign rule, first by the Persians, then by the Greeks, and finally by the Romans. The people longed for the fulfillment of the promises made by the prophets, a Messiah who would deliver them from oppression and establish God's kingdom on earth. The prophet Isaiah had spoken of a suffering servant who would bear the sins of many and bring salvation to all nations. Micah foretold that this ruler would be born in Bethlehem, and Zechariah spoke of a king who would come to Jerusalem riding on a donkey. The hope of the Messiah became central to the Jewish faith, and the people eagerly awaited the one who would fulfill these prophecies. As the centuries passed, the land of Israel became a crossroads of empires, and the Jewish people were scattered across the known world. Yet, they clung to the hope of the Messiah, who would bring peace, justice, and the restoration of Israel.